I've studied 13 of the most popular books of all time written in the area of wealth creation and financial strategy so that you don't have to. And over the course of the next few minutes, I'm going to walk you through what some of the greatest experts on earth in the area of financial success have said about how to make money. We'll be talking about insights from books like Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and authors such as Ramsey, Dave Ramsey, Mike Michalowicz, Napoleon Hill, and a whole host of other experts that have shared their wisdom over the course of the last couple of 100 years. We're going to be identifying the most important principles and strategies that you need in order for you to build wealth and become rich. And so let me just start by saying, personally speaking, let me tell you, I've applied these principles and I'm extremely wealthy. I can't believe this has happened again.
I told you to get better lights.
Look, I can't afford them at the moment, right? I don't know what you want me to do. You're not still recording, are you? Are you? Welcome to the Changing Minds podcast. I'm Owen Fitzpatrick, and I'm very delighted to welcome you to this very special episode of the Changing Minds podcast because we will be talking about money. And why is it so special, I hear you ask? Well, normally when I talk about a topic, for all of the episodes we've done so far, I have a level or degree of expertise in that area. This is the first time that I'll be speaking to you about this as an outside source, someone who doesn't really know that much about money, but has been learning a lot of it over the course of the last few months. So I'll be unpacking the wisdom from 13 of the most popular books of all time and sharing with you what I've learned as the most important principles and strategies to implement. Now, we'll also be talking about financial terminology. We'll start with that. We'll then go into a little bit about the history of finances. I know you're excited about that. Then we're going to be talking about some of the most important lessons that we learned from each of the books. And we'll finish off with sort of a breakdown of the most important advice that seems to be coming through time and time again from all of these different authors. So all in all, we've packed this full of wisdom. So do not look away for a second. And if you already know a lot of the stuff, you can skip ahead to the actual principles themselves if you know how the financial system works and whatnot. But I want to unpack it for everyone that was just like me a few months ago so that I can explain what the terms mean. So by the end of this, you will be much more clear over exactly how things work. And I've got some notes, so you'll see me glancing down, and that is not because of any other reason than I need them, because we're talking about money here. So let's start with some definitions. And the first definitions I want to talk about are the difference between financial independence, financial security, and financial freedom. Now, financial independence and financial security are much more about having enough money to be able to survive, right? So having enough money saved so that you feel comfortable that even if you don't get any more money in, you'll be okay. Whereas financial freedom is your ability to be able to do whatever you want. So to a degree, financial independence or financial security is you on your way, hopefully, towards financial freedom. But I also want to get a little bit more specific with some of the terms that have been thrown out quite a lot in the area of finances. And I really want to explain this to you simply so that when you hear these terms, you know what they are. First of all, there's what we call income, and that's obviously money coming in. So the money that comes into your household, that comes into you, that's your income. Expenditure is obviously the money you're spending, and profit is income minus expenditure. So that's the amount of income you make after you take away all your expenses. And there's two types of profit. There's what we call gross profit, and there's net profit. And gross profit is not like, oh, gross, I don't like that profit. It's more profit that you make after you take away one type of expenses, which is what we call cost of goods sold. So pretty much, let's imagine you've got two types of expenses. You've got all your general expenses, and you've got all the expenses specifically to do with whatever you're selling, whatever service you're offering. The revenue is like the overall income that the business takes in. Whereas the net profit is when you add not just the cost of goods sold, but you also have all the rest of the expenses that we use to run our business. When you take all of the expenses away, that's then what we call the net profit. So it's revenue minus all expenses is net profit. Revenue minus cost of goods sold, that's gross profit. And again, it's not gross as in, it's gross as in, gross. I don't even know what gross stands for or means. What other things we have? We have assets. An asset is something that you own that can earn you money. So if you have a house and you can use it and sell it later on, that's an asset, whereas a liability, it's when you owe money to someone else. So depreciation is a decrease in the value of a tangible asset. So you buy a car today, it's worth 50K. Next year, it's worth 45K. And then your net worth is the difference between your total assets and your total liabilities. How much do you own versus how much do you owe? Own, owe, Owen, owe. Do you get it? Let's talk about investment terms, because these are the ones that really trip me up. The other ones I was kind of understood most of them, but I want you to understand the investment terms. I know what you're saying. Brilliant. Thank you, Owen. I've been looking around the world trying to understand these investment terms, and finally you're going to translate them to me. Yes, I am. I certainly am. So let's start. First of all, in terms of investments, we have interest. So you take a loan out, and when you take a loan out, you've not just to pay it back, but you have to pay it back with interest. It's like the payment, the costs involved in getting the loan. So for me to be excited to lend you money, I'll charge you interest. And as I charge you interest, I know I don't just get the money back that you owe me, but you're also going to pay me a bit on top. That's the interest. Stocks, shares, and equities are all different examples of ownerships or stakes in an organization. So if you own like 1% of a business, that could be in the form of stocks or shares. Bonds you might have heard of, and bonds are small loans that you give to companies in return for interest or repayment. So it's not so much that you own a part of the company, but it's a loan that you give to the company in exchange that it pays you interest, and then it's also going to give you a guarantee pay at the end of the defined term. Equity is really the ownership interest that you have in that business. So if you have a 10% equity, it means you own 10% of that business. Yield is the rate of return by an investment. This means that whatever percentage you expect the amount of money that you have in your funds to increase by, that's the yield. So if you expect the 100,000 that you put into your investment, that ends up at the end of the year being 110,000, that's a 10% yield. Index is the measure used to track performance overall by a whole class of assets. Mutual funds are investments where a group of people are pooling money in for a diversified portfolio of stocks. Diversification is when you spread your investments across different asset classes, different sectors, different geographic locations. So you're not putting all your eggs in one basket, if you will. Liquidity is the ease with which an asset could be bought or sold. In other words, if something has a lot of liquidity, it means you can turn it into cash very quickly. So for example, if you've like money in a retirement account, that's not very liquid. Whereas if you've got money that you can very quickly take out, that is very liquid. And if you've got cash in your hand, that's like super liquid, although technically it's not liquid at all because it's like a thing, you know, unless you melt it, in which case it could be liquid. I'm hoping that's not confusing you. Capital gains are the profits realized by the sale of capital assets. So you buy a house, sell it for 10% more than it was worth, then that 10% is your capital gains. Dividends is whenever you have equity in an organization or you're a shareholder in an organization, then whenever you get a payment out, that is often called dividends. Then there's inflation and deflation. Inflation is when things get more expensive and it becomes more expensive to live. And deflation is when things get cheaper. And actually, New York at the moment is insanely expensive. Like the inflation here is ridiculous. I bought some lettuce recently and it cost like $7. Like lettuce. I mean, let us try to understand what that means. Did you get that? That was good, wasn't it? I can't take any more inflation. No, okay, I'm losing you. Lastly, we've leverage. That's the use of borrowed funds to invest in a particular stock. So let's say I don't have enough money to buy more stocks, but I say I want to, then I might leverage by taking out a loan in order to be able to invest money in the stock market. So that's an example of leverage. So look, I gave you a bunch of things. You're probably already saying to yourself, oh my goodness, I'm exhausted, Owen. There's too much information. If only there was a way that I didn't have to listen to you. Well, you can read my newsletter. I'm going to be writing about this in the newsletter. You'll have them all written out, nice little explanations for all of them. So owenfitzpatrick.com/newsletter. It's worth it. It's worth a go. It's worth a try. But let's get into some of the other important elements, because I think one factor we do need to talk about is the fact that wealth is relative. And what I mean by that is In order for us to be able to become wealthy or rich, we have to realize that what's rich to you is not the same as what's rich to Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos, right? What's rich to us is relative to where we are or relative to the people we surround ourselves with. And so the first thing to know is that we need to be very clear about exactly what do we want to be able to afford. So what do you want in your life? What do you want to have in your life? What kind of experiences do you want? What are the things that you need money for? And by thinking about it that way, you're much more likely to be able to then find ways to be able to build the wealth you're looking for. But if you don't have a reason to be wealthy, if you don't know what wealth means to you, then you're going to struggle. So the first step is to be clear over exactly what wealth means to you and realize that the relationship between wealth and happiness is not what a lot of people think it is. What the research suggests is that money and happiness are related to each other up to the point that you feel that you're earning enough to make a decent living. Up to that point, certainly, the more money you have, the happier it does tend to make you. But once you've reached a level where you're earning enough to have a decent life, after that, the increase in money is not really related to the increase in happiness. In other words, if you feel that you're earning enough money to feel good about your life, then you earning twice as much money is not going to make you twice as happy or even slightly happier. Sometimes the more money you have, more money, more problems, in the words of a famous philosopher. So you want to be careful not to conflate this notion that money is bought by happiness. Money does not buy happiness. And sometimes people will give you the clickbaity, money does buy happiness, and they'll give you the catch. But the research shows that it does relate to happiness to a certain point, but after that, not so much. So it's crucial that we're aware of that. So before we get into the specific strategies outlined by the books, I do want to talk to you briefly about the history of money and the history of wealth. So this all began when we started to barter, right? Back in ancient times, we would barter. We would swap a goat for a rabbit, right? I don't know why you'd want a rabbit. I mean, rabbits are quite tasty, although they're very cute, so you don't want to eat them. But let's imagine you have a goat and someone else is a rabbit. And again, I'm pretty sure you would never make that trade. It's like the size even, like it could be like a goat for like 5 rabbits. That would work, right? So it's like, I'll give you 5 of my rabbits for one of your goats. And you're like, well, this is the greatest of all time. And anyway, the point is they bartered. And they bartered usually livestock, they bartered tools, they bartered food. And that was the way we did it back in the day. After a while, we started to use different medium of exchange, what we call commodities, which were things like shells or beads or grains or salt, those kind of things. And we used them because they had some sort of inherent value in them. Eventually, we started to use sort of more precious metals like gold and silver. And they were quite useful because they could be measured and there was a sort of a standardized weight attached to them. So therefore, we were able to tell the difference between something that was worth a certain amount versus something else. And that allowed us to be a lot more effective, especially with international trade. Eventually, I think it was like the 8th century or so in China, and then it spread to the rest of the world, we started using paper money. And paper money started to become popular and emerged to facilitate, the ability to save money and whatnot, and the ability to accumulate wealth, deposit taking, lending, all that sort of jazz started quite a while ago. And then we sort of went to flat money. And flat money is money that is not based upon some sort of commodity, but it's money that is created and built upon the trusts of the governments. So the central government of the country creates the money, and we value and all agree to value money in a specific way. The great author Yuval Noah Harari talks about this in his great book Sapiens, where he talks about how money is really a story that we tell each other and we all agree with and we all are aligned with about what's valuable. So we all agree on the value of money, and that's why, let's say, the US dollar is appreciated by everyone, even for the people that don't like America. So in terms of the history of wealth, wealth is really not just about money, but back in the ancient days, obviously, wealth was really about how much access you had to natural resources, how much land you owned, right? It was generated by trade and commerce. It was generated by this notion of the feudal system around the Middle Ages or so, where there was a monarch that was the head, and then there was lords and knights and whatnot. And they had serfs and people that reported to them, not smurfs. I know what you're thinking, smurfs. No, they didn't have little blue creatures. Instead, they had serfs, which were people who were a lot poorer. And so what you had back then was you had a system whereby when you had this kind of status, you also had this kind of power, and this power came along with it a lot of resources and therefore money in this feudal system. The merchant class meant that you could make a lot of money if you were trading well. And then we had obviously the industrialization part of the jigsaw, where people were establishing factories. And when that happened, it transformed the landscape of the financial system. Obviously, financial markets were born. We found that people were now trading. They were now creating all of these, what we call securities, which are like things like bonds and stocks and shares and combinations of all those. It became quite complex. There was globalization, which again affected it. There was entrepreneurship, where people would work for themselves. There was the technology that came along initially with computers, and then obviously the internet, which blew that around. We've the knowledge economy, intellectual property, and we've social media, and even the influencer economy and whatnot. So the world of wealth has been something that is being quite transformed over the course of the last 10 years. Wealth has been, even with cryptocurrency and Bitcoin and all that sort of stuff. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that with all of that complexity, it's almost like a kind of game. And in a way, just like computer games, money tends to trigger us from a neuroscience perspective in a very special way. First of all, we all are probably familiar with the chemical dopamine, which is the motivation molecule. It's the chemical that's released in our brain that makes us want something. And money very effectively manages to trigger that particular chemical, because money becomes almost like an agreed sense of value in our mind. And whenever we get more money, our brain releases or triggers the release of dopamine. And it doesn't matter what language you speak, it doesn't matter where you live. You very early on in your life, you learn how valuable money is, and your brain releases and triggers the release of dopamine that drives you to want to make more money. And even though you might not always be aware of what you're going to spend the money on, you still want the money. So the research shows that when people see money or whatnot, there's parts of the brain, like what we call the nucleus accumbens and the ventral striatum, tend to be the areas where dopamine is driving us to want this kind of money. And it's one of the things that happens in our brain. We also have, whenever we do have money, there's a tendency where we avoid losing out or avoid losing the money we already have, more so that we desire to get money that we don't yet have. And this is based upon the principle of loss aversion. This is the notion that we feel more pain by losing money we have than we feel pleasure by gaining the exact same amount of money if we don't have it. And so loss aversion means that our brain is responding differently to the thought or the threat of risk. And this can very much affect the decisions that we make whenever we're deciding on, let's say, for example, what investment to make. Our risk management can be affected because our brains are reacting with, let's just say, more panic or more cortisol, which is a stress hormone, sometimes even epinephrine or norepinephrine, also known as noradrenaline or adrenaline, in response to the possibility that we might lose money. And so therefore, sometimes it can skew our decisions, which is also important for us to be aware of. And the other part of the brain to be aware of, if we're talking about our ability to handle money, is the part of our brain responsible for delayed gratification. And this is really a part of the frontal part of the brain called the prefrontal cortex. And this is responsible for decision making, it's responsible for problem solving, connects with lots of the rest of the brain. But when it comes to delayed gratification, this is our ability to exert control over ourselves and to be able to hold off and wait for a later point in time so that we can, in fact, make decisions that are more long-term decisions. And as we'll talk about in a little bit, some of the most important lessons you can possibly learn about growing wealth is patience and this ability to delay gratification. So you activating your prefrontal cortex will definitely fall into line with a lot of what the great experts out there suggest are some of the best pieces of wisdom on the topic. Now, before I get in, which we're just about to look at, the different books, before I get into them, let me just caution you and say sometimes whenever we read a lot about the financial world, sometimes it could be overwhelming. Sometimes it could be complex. Sometimes we might know what to do, but there's a gap between what we want to do and what we actually do. Why? Because emotionally, we're scared. Emotionally, we're so tempted by making the short-term play or making the short-term deal that we tend to avoid making the right decision because we make the decision of what we want to get now. It's also important to realize that sometimes books like this can build unrealistic expectations or make us think that one size fits all. One approach will work for everyone equally, and that's just not the way it works. We also have to take into account that we have individual differences and that external factors and circumstances and the market conditions are all going to be things that affect us. So I give you that caveat in mind as we get into each of the different books that I'm going to walk you through some of the most important principles for. So let's start with one of the most important books ever written in the area of wealth. And this is the first book I ever read about wealth and finances. I read this many years ago when I was a teenager, in fact. And it's called The Richest Man in Babylon. And it was done through all these parables about ancient Babylon. It was written by George S. Clason in the 1920s, I believe. And he gives a few bits and pieces of advice in this. He says, make sure you save a portion of your income. He suggested 10% for savings, right? He said, avoid debt and live within your means. Try to avoid taking out loans. Invest your savings wisely. Be very clever with the way in which you invest it. Seek out opportunities for growth and wealth building. So always pay attention to chances where you can improve your amount of wealth. And probably one of the most important things he mentioned, he wasn't the first person to mention this, nor was he the last, but he talked about the power of compound interest. So let me pause here and just give you a brief understanding of what compound interest is all about. So let's imagine you've got $1,000. And let's imagine you have a guaranteed, and this is not realistic, but let's imagine you have a guaranteed return of 10% of that $1,000. So you know that if you put $1,000 in, a year from now, that $1,000 will be worth to you $1,100, so $1,100. So hopefully you're with me so far. And what happens is, even though it doesn't seem to make much of a difference for the first few years, over 20 years, if you were to do this, by the end of the 20th year, that could be worth $6,700. Now, if you were to just put in $1,000 and you just add $100 to it every year for 20 years, that turns into around $3,000. But with compound interest, it's $6,700, more than twice the amount you would do the other way. That's compound interest. What does it mean? It means playing the long game is the smartest approach. It means interest really adds up over time. So a lot of great wisdom there from George S. Clason. Next, we have Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. This is a classic self-help book. Lots of people love this. One of the pieces of advice is develop a burning desire for your goals, create a definite plan to achieve wealth, believe, persist, and surround yourself with great experts out there. Some fundamentals there, nothing too earth-shattering. The Millionaire Next Door by Thomas J. Stanley and William D. Danko is another book written in the 90s. And this was about habits of millionaires in America. Something similar to what Clayson said. They say live within your means or live below your means. Focus on accumulating wealth as opposed to showing off, as opposed to, going on Instagram looking, look at my new watch. Look at this. Look how fancy this. Oh, I got new sneakers. I got new runners. Oh, look at me. Instead, you just focus on accumulating wealth. Diversify your assets. So diversification, don't put all your eggs in one basket. Prioritize savings and investment. Make sure, like the 10% Clayson suggested, or even more. Have a disciplined saving plan for retirement accounts, investment portfolios. Think in terms of long term, something we've already mentioned. And then focus on opportunities like entrepreneurship or self-employment that might provide you with ways to create more wealth. This theme was then continued by Robert T. Kiyosaki, who wrote a very famous book called Rich Dad, Poor Dad. It's like here's a rich dad gives him advice, a poor dad gives him advice and whatnot. And he talks about the mindset and strategies to achieve financial independence. He talks about the difference between having assets and liabilities and to try to maximize having assets, to constantly educate yourself about finances, to take calculated risk, learn from failure, and to aim for financial independence through passive income as opposed to active income. So active income is income that you're earning whenever you work. So you work 12 hours, you get paid per hour. Passive income is when you're getting paid and you're asleep or you're at least not working. And so creating products, creating things that outlive you or can work while you're doing your thing, that is something that is equivalent to passive income. And it's a great way of being able to scale up how much money you're earning. Then we've got Total Money Makeover by Dave Ramsey. He talks about creating a budget and sticking to it rigorously, paying off debt systematically using what he calls the debt snowball method. Now, the debt snowball method is what he suggests is, let's imagine you got like a bunch of loans out. You got a big loan and you got a bunch of small loans. He suggests pay the small loans completely and totally fully and pay the least amount that you need to on the big loan. What you do is once you've paid off a small loan, and then you go to the next small loan and you keep doing it, what that does is it sort of psychologically gives you a feeling of progress, gives you a feeling of momentum, and acts like a sort of a snowball. So by the end of it, you actually find yourself a lot more motivated. You feel like you're making progress. He says build an emergency fund, which should have between 3 and 6 months of expenses. I think that's an excellent, important point. Invest 15% of the household income into retirement accounts. Save for children's educations if you have kids. Pay off the mortgage early if you can. And he also suggested the use of, now this is in the 90s, a cash envelope system, right? A cash envelope system is, right, we've this amount of money for holiday, this amount of money for our coffees, this amount of money for our food and all that sort of stuff. Again, if you can be that disciplined, I wouldn't be using cash envelope, but you can have like different amounts for different things that you save for. Then we've got The Wealthy Barber by David Chilton. This is like a parable or story or whatever. It's about a small town barber. He suggests, again, one of the bits of wisdom, pay yourself first by saving a portion of your income, again, the 10%, and that's a non-negotiable expense. Invest regularly in a diversified portfolio. So once again, diversify. Long-term financial goals, the long-term again. Seek advice from knowledgeable professionals. Avoid debt and overspending, and then compound interest, that old chestnut. We then have The Automatic Millionaire by David Bach. Pay yourself first. We've heard that multiple times. He also said something pretty cool, which is automate savings and investments. So make it so that you can automate the savings to come straight out of your account. So you don't have to do anything manually, because it removes one extra step, makes it a lot easier, and makes you need less discipline, I suppose. Maximize contributions to your retirement accounts. Pay off debt aggressively. Purchase affordable insurance. Cultivate good financial habits. And he also talks about what he calls the latte factor. It's like saving the amount of money, like buying one less latte a day, and eventually the unnecessary expenses all add up to quite a lot. So if you can tell right at the moment, there's a number of themes, right? There's a number of things that all of these authors are saying or suggesting, which is quite interesting. And they tend to be emphasizing the things like pay yourself first, save first, think long term, diversify your portfolio, those kind of things. So a lot of the same kind of wisdom are coming from there. The next one is Money Master Your Game by Tony Robbins. He interviewed successful investors. He talks about how you need to control your finances, take charge of them, educate yourself, be specific with goals, diversify, minimize the fees that you're paying, and find fulfillment by being able to make an impact on other people's lives with your money. Then we've got a really cool book called Profit First by Mike Michalowicz. And he talks about a really great system for whenever you're running your business or whenever you're trying to manage your finances. What you need to do is take the profit first. So whatever profit it is, have a certain percentage. You can start small in increments and work up, but you take the profit first. And then what you do is you figure out how you're going to pay the expenses and whatnot from the rest of the money. But he says, try to take your profit first, because often what we do is we spend all the expenses and then there's never any profit for us to take at the end of it. And when you do take the profit first, you will find a way. He said you can come up with 4 different accounts: a profit account, an owner's compensation account, which is where the money comes in, operational expenses, where it's what you spend the money on, and then taxes, so that you're saving for taxes for the end of the year. It's a really, really great strategy. I do a variation of that, and that's actually made a big difference to me. And do a regular assessment of how it's working so that it can really help. The next one is The Millionaire Fastlane by MJ DeMarco. And what MJ talks about is using time and leveraging time and some of the resources and systems to be able to make money a lot quicker. So he talks about the importance of value creation and being an entrepreneur and having control and being independent, so that you're not relying on the market to work out for you. You're generating yourself and creating businesses that actually make you more money. But the next couple of books I found to be quite useful and quite interesting, because they did have a certain more specific take on it. And the first is I Will Teach You to Be Rich by Rami Sethi. And what Rami talks about is he talks about automating your finances, not dissimilar to the suggestion we talked about before, but it's making sure you set up systems whereby it's automatically going into the various different accounts whenever you earn money. He says, focus on the big wins. And that is, if you're going to try to reduce some of your expenses, try to reduce it in terms of your housing, your transportation, or your food. He says, maximize your credit card rewards and benefits. Invest in low-cost, diversified, passive index funds for long-term growth. So passive fund is different to a managed fund. A managed fund is when someone's managing for you. He said diversification is the key. Again, we've heard that. Start investing early and regularly. Be consistent with it. Prioritize personal development, investing in yourself. Automate your own habits of personal development. Network, build a good social network. Negotiate for higher salaries. Negotiate for lower debts or lower bills. And really enjoy your life. Live a rich life is another thing that he does talk about, and make sure you're making constant contributions to it. And then the other book that I wanted to talk about, and then we'll get to the very final one, but the other book I wanted to talk about before the big one is a book called The Intelligent Investor by Benjamin Graham. And I like this book particularly because it's very along the lines of what Warren Buffett talks about in terms of his investment strategies. In a nutshell, diversification is one of the main principles, as is long-term perspective. So it's thinking in the long term, thinking of diversifying, which means, not just putting all your eggs in one basket. But he also talks about emotional discipline. And this is something that Charlie Munger, who actually was the partner of Warren Buffett for many years. Charlie talks about the importance of disciplining your emotions. So again, a lot of the Intelligent Investor, there's a lot of overlap with Buffett and Charlie Munger, of course. And so the concepts I really liked in this were the concept, first of all, called value investing. And a value investing is a certain approach whereby you identify stocks that are trading below their intrinsic value. Now, the intrinsic value of a stock is when you look at how much that is actually worth. And the way you do that is you look at the cash flow, you look at the earnings, you look at the dividends, you look at the assets, you look at the growth prospects. So you actually do an analysis of how much that stock is worth, and then you figure out how much it's selling for. And then the difference between that is what you call your margin of safety. And the margin of safety is whenever you buy a stock at a significant discount to the amount that it's actually worth. And again, this is the strategy that this value investing is something that Warren Buffett is very much known for. So we talked a lot about different types of insights that we've gotten. There's one final book I do want to mention. It's one of my favorites. It's by Morgan Housel, and it's called The Psychology of Money. Now, it's obvious why it's my favorite. It's the word psychology in it. But in this particular book, he walks through a number of things that are really useful ways of thinking about money. Kind of reminds me, whenever you think about productivity, there's a great book called 4,000 Weeks by Oliver Burkeman. And this is almost like, to me, the equivalent from a financial perspective on it. But let me walk through some of the insights here. First of all, Housel talks about understanding behavioral biases. He says, a lot of the success or failure we'll have with money comes about as a result of our psychology. This is loss aversion, as we mentioned, being overconfident, thinking you know too much, right? The recency bias, whatever's just happened, we tend to overvalue. So when we see the market change, fluctuate, for example, we tend to panic. We tend to think to ourselves, oh, things are bad, therefore they'll always be bad. And we're sort of anchored into this sort of frame of mind. We tend to look around what everyone else is doing, and if everyone else is panicking, we're likely to panic too, as opposed to what we really need to do, which is to have that long-term perspective. He emphasizes the importance of emotional intelligence, being aware of yourself, aware of your triggers, aware of your own, what's going on for you, and be able to regulate your own emotions effectively. And he says the key is for you to be able to be more disciplined and be patient and have a long-term view. This again connects with compound interest, but it also is really about your ability to surf the waves whenever your money is going up and down and you're seeing yourself losing lots of money. It's being able to be judicial in how you manage your money in those times, and having the long-term perspective is crucial. He talks about being able to handle risk, especially with things like loss aversion. And in the first part, being able to diversify whatever you put out there so that you're mitigating the amount of risk involved. But even when you do have it, even when you know that the assets that you've allocated, whatever stocks you bought or shares you bought or bonds you bought, even when you know that there's a lot of fluctuations, there's a lot of changes in the market, it's still about making it so that you can adapt accordingly, but you don't do a knee-jerk reaction. You're doing it in a responsible, responsive way. He talks about financial plans, which incorporate unexpected events, incorporate setbacks, and how avoiding huge losses is more important than chasing big gains. And he then talks about the importance of finances and the importance of your investment decisions, largely as a result of the fact that inflation is going to happen. So the same amount of money you have 10 years from now is not going to be as valuable as it is today. So we need to make sure our rate of return, the amount of money we're making in our investments, is better than inflation. That's an important piece. And then finally, he says, live simply, don't show off, and feel gratitude for what you already have. Wealth is relative. And this is a really important point. I think he quotes Seneca in his book, The Shortness of Life. He's a famous Stoic philosopher, where he talks about wealth is measured in terms of free time rather than material possessions. How a lot of times the experiences we have are worth so much more, and the research has shown this, are worth so much more than the actual possessions we have. So not to be wasting time trying to show off to everyone else how much you have, but to invest your money in things that make your life better. And to me, that's one of the most important takeaways that we need to be able to remember as we move forward. So if we're looking at, let's say, breaking all of this down into 12 lessons or 12 principles of wealth creation, what are they from everything we've learned? Well, number one, compound interest. Number two, pay yourself first. Number three, remember the margin of safety. So look for opportunities where what something's worth is a lot higher than what it's being sold for. Diversification. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. Long-term investing. Think long-term and think about what this is going to be worth in 10, 20 years. Live below your means. Don't spend money like you're crazy, investing in all sorts of mad stuff. Don't be going out in parties where you're off your head on all sorts of different drugs, having crazy time with crazy people. Right? I know if you're listening to this podcast, you're probably the kind of person that would do that. But try to avoid it. Live within your means. Value creation, find ways to create more value. Active income versus passive income, try to find sources of passive income so that you're earning while you sleep or while you listen to this podcast. Emotional discipline, try to not allow your emotions make you have a knee-jerk reaction to whatever goes on in the market. Opportunity cost, remember, whatever you're spending money on, you're not spending money on other things. So it's not just about whether this is a good decision now. It's also about what are your other choices. Automate your plans. So make it so that things are easy. Automate your bank account, your transfers, so that the money immediately goes into your savings. And finally, constantly monitor what you're doing and constantly adjust. In a nutshell, if I was to summarize it all, I'd say be patient, be disciplined, be organized, and save, brah. Save money. When you think like this, you can realize that over the course of the studies, these 13 books, and over the course of the last few months, if there's one lesson I can tell you, it's that it's not that complicated. I mean, don't get me wrong, the financial systems are super complicated, right? But the secrets to becoming more wealthy, right? All the insights from these books, not that complicated, but they do require discipline. And so what I'd ask you to do is take some time and figure out what is it that you want to earn? What is it that you want to earn for? And then make a plan of what you're going to do to take the strategies and ideas that you learned today and apply them into your life. Now, if you want to read more on this, check out my newsletter, owenfitzpatrick.com/newsletter. And the edition will be out tomorrow. If you're watching this the day it comes out, it'll be out tomorrow. And I'm going to have a lot of this down so you'll be able to follow it along, probably more slowly. But it's really critical for you to apply these principles. Remember, becoming rich is not about knowing something. It's about doing something and doing something consistently, building the habits. Just like you want to build habits of health, you need to be practicing it on a regular basis. So I hope that this helps make you money. I hope there's some insight, some nugget that makes you even wealthier than you already are. And to a degree, if you're able to listen to this episode, and if it's able to put a smile on your face, aren't you wealthier than pretty much anyone? The answer is almost certainly no. But at the same time, I'm hoping that you did find it useful. Thank you very much for watching. Please do share the episode, rate and review and subscribe and all that sort of jazz. But for now, take care. May the force be with you. And check out one of my other episodes that is popping up right now. I think you'll like it.